Hello, is this working? Okay, so our next speaker is Chris Popa. He's the Senior Philanthropy Manager at ProVet International, inspiring individuals and institutions to support ProVet's mission of replacing 50% of animal products globally with plant-based and cultivated foods by 2040. He has a background in theoretical physics and business management, and his passion is to advocate for effective giving and plant-based lifestyle in order to create a better world for every sentient being. And today he's talking about intercausal impacts and the power of food system change. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia, for the introduction. And thanks also to all of you for being here. It's really exciting to be speaking in front of so many people who share my passion to make the world a better place and to be as effective as possible in doing so. Now, if we take a look at the world as it is today, we see that there are actually a lot of problems to be solved. And over the course of the effective altruism movement, there have been generally three major categories of problems that have emerged. And I list them in no particular order. So first of all, global health and development. Second, animal welfare. And third, long-termism and existential risk. Now, the common approach that we take in our movement is that once we have defined these categories or these cause areas, we look at them separately. And then we set up organizations that do interventions to solve these problems. And then also we set up meta-organizations that evaluate these organizations and interventions. So, for example, in the area of global health and development, we have GiveWell. In the area of animal welfare, we have animal charity evaluators. And in the area of long-termism and existential risk, we have, for example, the Center for the Study on Existential Risk, which tries to evaluate organizations and interventions in this area. Now, this very structured and focused approach has been one of the reasons why our movement has been very successful to this point already. It also comes with some caveats, however. So I want to talk to you a little bit about those caveats. And let's imagine, first of all, that we look only at one particular cause area. We call it cause area A, and we have a number of different interventions that we can do in order to solve this problem in that cause area. We can make an evaluation and we reach the conclusion, okay, there's this one intervention X that is the most effective intervention in this cause area. Now, if we stop our analysis at this point, it's a no-brainer, right? So we'll clearly say intervention X should be prioritized. But as often in life, if we do something even with the best intentions, there can be unintended consequences. So this intervention X that is so effective in contributing to the solution in cause area A can have a negative impact on another cause area. So, for example, in this cause area B. What can be an example of such a type X intervention? Let's say, for example, we are successful in inventing a super intelligent AGI, which finds a technological solution to the climate crisis. But then this AGI moves on to disempower humanity and drive us to extinction. So that would be a very extreme example. Let's think of maybe an example that is closer to the present moment that we are in. So you might have heard of the poor meat eaters problem. It describes a situation where if we bring people out of poverty, they tend to eat more meat. So while we increase human well-being, we decrease animal well-being with such an intervention. So these are two examples to give you an impression of how these type X interventions with negative externalities can look like. And if we then would have this whole picture of all the impacts an intervention has in different cause areas, and we try to evaluate its entire impact, we can call that the intercausal impact, we'll see that, okay, it's still a quite effective intervention, but it's a bit less than we initially thought because of this negative externality. So disregarding negative externalities is one way in which this approach that centers on one cause area only can go wrong. And if we compare this intervention now with another intervention that does not have a negative externality, like this intervention Y, we can see that despite intervention Y is less effective in its main cause area, overall it's the more effective intervention. And of course, as effective altruists, we don't want to maximize impact in one cause area, we want to maximize total impact to improve the world. So now, let's consider another way in which this approach of focusing on one cause area only can go wrong. And basically, it's the opposite of disregarding negative externalities. It's disregarding positive externalities. So we can have an intervention of this type that has its main positive impact in one particular cause area, but then also has a substantial positive impact in another cause area, so that if we do an aggregate analysis over all cause areas, we see that this intervention Z, in our example, is the most effective intervention to do. Now, it is reasonable to ask, well, do these kind of interventions even exist? Because we are well aware that some interventions are 1,000 times more effective than others. So how likely is it that there is an intervention that has a really substantial positive impact in different cause areas? And while these kind of interventions are rare, I want to talk to you about one very notable example for such an intervention, which is solving the problem of animal agriculture. Now, in order to take a closer look at this and analyze this, we're going to use our proven framework. So we're going to look at 3 metrics, the scale, the neglectedness, and the tractability of the problem. So let's start with asking the question, how big is the problem of animal agriculture? And we begin by considering the environment, specifically the climate crisis. Now, there are a lot of human interventions or human activities and different industries that we've set up that contribute to the accumulation of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. One industry that is very often underrepresented, though, in the public discussion surrounding the climate crisis is the animal industry. Because if we look at the actual numbers, about 20% of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions come from the animal industry. A lot of that is methane that is produced by cows as part of their digestion. On the other hand, another problem relating to animal agriculture and the environment is deforestation. Now, trees and plants, they are natural carbon sinks. So if we cut them down, we exacerbate the climate crisis. And deforestation in the world happens to a large degree because of the way our food system works at the moment. So to take a look at one very important example, the Amazon rainforest. It's the biggest rainforest on the planet. It's also the place with the biggest biodiversity on the planet. And about 80% of the deforestation happening in the Amazon rainforest at this moment happens because of animal agriculture. So to make space for grazing animals, but more importantly, or to a larger degree actually, to produce feed for farmed animals all around the world. And by the way, all the percentages that I give you are rounded to 5 percentage points. Now, if we talk about using food resources, like for example, land, in order to produce feed for animals instead of food for humans, it also becomes a matter of justice. So let's think about this. At the present moment, we live in a world where a lot of people don't have adequate access to food. According to the United Nations, that about 800 million people. That's 1 out of 10 people on the planet. So it's a huge issue. And in a world like this, it's very important that we are very mindful and effective in how we use the limited food resources. Now, in the way our current food system works, about 45% of all the food that is produced on the planet is used as feed for farmed animals. So it's a huge waste of this precious resource, especially considering that an animal takes in much more calories to sustain itself than we get out if we eat the animal. And on the other hand, this system also uses up a lot of land mass. So out of all the agricultural land that is available on the planet for us to use, about 80% is used for farming animals. Only about 20% of the calories we get in the global average come from animal products. So this is, again, a huge waste of precious resources. And then there's also an issue pertaining to our health. Now, on an individual level, whether you eat meat or you're vegan doesn't really say whether you're healthy or not. It really depends on the details. At the same time, we know that a lot of these chronic diseases that are very prevalent in the Western world, like heart disease, diabetes, different kinds of cancer, they are often linked to an overconsumption of animal products. But that's personal health, right? So let's put that aside for a moment and think about global health. Now, in terms of global health, one of the big issues of our time are pandemics. And if we take a look at the numbers here, we know that about 3 out of 4 newly emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. So they are transmitted from animals to humans. In the modern factory farming system, we have a situation where you have a huge number of genetically similar individuals crowded in tiny spaces under highly unhygienic conditions. And this kind of setup is really a recipe for disaster, a high-risk scenario for future pandemics. And this, of course, has happened in the past many times that pandemics and epidemics had their origin in the factory farming system. On the other hand, we also have an issue with antibiotics. So currently, worldwide, about 70% of all antibiotics are given to farmed animals because it makes the production more efficient. It makes the animals grow faster instead of using it for treating humans. Now, being so wasteful with antibiotics is highly problematic because it risks creating antibiotic resistance. And that means that it could render one of the biggest achievements of modern medicine obsolete if we can't use antibiotics anymore to treat humans. And then finally, I want to talk to you about a topic that's very close to my heart, and I'm sure also close to the heart of many of you, which is animals. And, well, animals, they are different to us in many ways, right? In terms of their complexity, their intelligence, their moral agency. So there are important differences, but at the same time, they are also very much alike us in very important ways. So just like us, they want to experience freedom, joy, love. They have social relationships, they have families. They don't want to suffer, they want to live. And especially if you have ever connected to an animal, maybe you've lived together with an animal at some point in your life, you might have had this realization that animals are not some things, but some ones. Now, in the current food system, about 75 billion land animals are killed every year. So land animals means cows, pigs, a lot of chicken, and some other animals. And if we also consider marine animals, specifically fish, the estimations range from 1 to 3 trillion fish that are killed every year. So a huge number of individuals that have a conscious experience are affected by our current food system. Now, let's take a step back again and look at the big picture one more time. We have talked about several good reasons to move away from animal agriculture and shift towards a plant-based food system. And almost without anyone noticing it, I added one reason, which is the taste. So, as you might know, a plant-based diet can be amazingly delicious and joyful. You can call that motivated reasoning or anecdotal evidence, maybe. I call it first-hand experience. So, yeah, a lot of good reasons to make this shift, individually or as a society. And if we take a closer look at these reasons, we can see actually that from the left to the right, in some way, they become more and more altruistic. So if, for example, we prioritize our taste, we think of ourselves in the present moment. If we prioritize our health, especially individual health, we think of ourselves in the future. If we care about justice, we think about the other humans on the planet, especially those who are less privileged than we are. And if we care about animals, of course, we think about all the animals that are suffering on factory farms all around the world. And if we care about the environment, since the natural world is the foundation of all life on this planet, we think of all sentient beings in the present and in the future. And with this slight shift of perspective, we can see that these reasons that we've discussed before, they correspond to moral circles that from the left to the right become increasingly more inclusive. Just lost my train of thought here. So, moral circles that become more inclusive, yes. And, well, we have a dilemma here, because if we eat animals on a regular basis, which we do as a society, but also as individuals oftentimes, it's really hard to, at the same time, think about animals as deserving of moral consideration, right? Because that creates a conflict in our mind. So we have, on the one hand, valuing the life of an animal, but on the other hand, taking the life of an animal without necessity. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. But if we remove animals from our diet and from our food system, we can actually resolve this conflict. We can also break this in-group, out-group thinking. We can expand our moral circle, first to include animals, but then further on also to establish a value system that grants moral consideration to all sentient beings, regardless of how relatable they are or how different they are from us, and also regardless of how distant they are in space or time. And from a long-termist perspective, considering, for example, the potential emergence of artificial sentience in the future, a value system like this can be highly beneficial in order to steer the far future trajectory of our civilization in a positive direction. So, with all this in mind, who of you in this room would agree that this problem of animal agriculture is big in scale? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, we have a large majority here. So let's take a look at our second metric, the neglectedness. So how much is already being done in our society in order to reduce the use of animals? And I want to start this by giving you an intuitive picture of the different ways in which we use animals in our society. So let's first get some sort of frame of reference here. In today's world, the human population of our planet is about 8 billion people. And the size of this circle represents this number, 8 billion people. And now let's consider, for example, pets. So dogs, cats, other pets who live on shelters and oftentimes are killed because there are not sufficient resources to sustain them. Now, this tiny orange circle that appeared represents the number or an estimation of the number of pets that are killed globally because of limited resources. And you can see it's a relatively small number. If we consider the clothing industry, so leather, wool, fur, and so on, the number of animals killed every year for this industry is much larger already, but still a relatively small number. Similarly, in the field of research, so here we look at medical research on the one hand, but also animal testing for cosmetics, we have an even larger number of animals, but still relatively small. If we consider, however, the food system, and we start just by looking at land animals, so meat, dairy, and eggs, the number of animals killed every year is about 10 times the human population of our planet. And if we even extend this analysis to marine animals or fish specifically, we can see that we are talking about a completely different order of magnitude. And I haven't even talked about EAGxBerlin, the shrimp. They would completely explode this slide, right? So looking at this data rationally, it is clear that if we want to change something relating to animals or the use of animals, we should focus on the food system. But, well, as you know, humans are not always rational in their decision making. So if we take a look at donation behavior, the picture looks quite different because, first of all, most donations don't go to animal-related issues, but to human-related issues, as you can see here. So these are numbers from the US, just to have an example. And you can see here that only about 3% of all donations go to animal-related issues. But then, even in this small fraction of the whole pie of donations, most of it doesn't go to farmed animals, but of course goes to pets or to shelters. So only about 30%, and that's an upper bound actually, goes to farmed animals and the food system specifically. So, with that in mind, who in this room would agree that this topic is highly neglected? Okay, again, a large majority. So, let's move on to look at our third metric, the tractability. So, what can we do in order to make progress on this topic and to change the food system of the world? Now, if we want to change the world, or specifically if we want to change the way that the world eats, it's very useful to look at this illustration. So we have a spectrum from the left to the right with very meat-based diets on the left side and a plant-based diet or a vegan diet on the right side. And we have a distribution of people with the large majority of the human population eating animal products on a regular basis, so finding themselves on the left side of the spectrum. We have a certain movement into the direction of a plant-based diet and a plant-based food system. And then we have a relative minority of people who are vegan, for example, or eat plant-based entirely. Now, also what we can see in this illustration is that it's sort of an uphill battle oftentimes. So depending on where you live, certainly not in Berlin, but in almost every other place outside of Berlin, it can be sometimes really hard to follow a plant-based diet in everyday life. So you might find a lot of social stigma. Also, it might be hard actually to find good plant-based options in your everyday life, maybe at the canteen where you work or wherever you go shopping. So there are a lot of barriers, so to speak, for people to actually make this transition. So what can we do if we are aware of this? Well, on the one hand, we know of all of these good reasons that we've discussed before, and we can use these reasons to increase the individual motivation of people. And some people have a strong bond with animals, others are environmentalists, other people just want to be healthy, and people have very, very different motivations. So it's really important that we make use of all these good reasons and motivators to reach as many people as possible. But on the other hand, well, to quote Tobias Lehnert, he's one of the co-founders of ProVet, if veganizing the world depends on every single person choosing altruism over self-interest, the world will not be vegan anytime soon. So we can't rely that people are just enough motivated to overcome all these barriers that they might find in their everyday life. So what we have to do is create a systemic change, so kind of put a weight on this scale here. And we can again use all of these reasons to influence the institutions of our society, the political system, the educational system, the medical community, the food industry, all of these forces that shape our society and decide whether it's easy or not to eat plant-based in everyday life. So ideally, if we have these two forces in place, what happens is that the system tips. And a bit further on, in the EA speak very near-term future, the world will look like this. So we have a large majority of the world's population eating mostly plant-based. And in this hypothetical society, even if eating meat or animal products is still possible, it's sort of a norm-deviating behavior, so it doesn't really happen on an everyday basis. So creating this tip of a system is exactly the reason why ProVet as an organization was set up. So we are an international organization that pursues the mission to replace 50% of animal products globally with plant-based and cultivated foods until the year 2040. And the vision behind our work is that we want to create a world where everyone can choose delicious and healthy food that is good for all humans, all animals, and for our planet. And in the following, I want to give you some insights into the different types of interventions that we pursue in order to make this vision a reality. So one of the ways we go about it is that we want to inspire and support people to eat plant-based. In Germany, for example, we have this school program where we go to schools all over the country and we have campaign days. So we give talks or lectures to the school children. We explain them all the positive sides of eating plant-based. And as you can see, children can be very, very enthusiastic, especially because the most exciting part of these campaign days are interactive cooking workshops. So school children can play with tofu and other delicious plant-based options. What's really great also about this program is that the United Nations actually decided to award it a prize, the Momentum for Change Award, for outstanding achievement in the category of planetary health. So the United Nations actually acknowledged that a program that is aimed at bringing plant-based diets to school children is a very effective intervention for climate change or for averting climate change. And that's a good sign. Now, another intervention we do in this area is that we have the Veggie Challenge. It's a support program where everyone can participate for free. It goes on for 1 month and you get support, advice, how to implement a plant-based diet in everyday life. A lot of people have the motivation but not the know-how how to do it. And you get a lot of recipes and a mentor, so to really feel that you're not alone on this journey. And then I want to move on to another area of interventions that we do, which is improving the availability of plant-based options and alternative proteins in general. We do this mainly through collaboration. So we try to collaborate with the food industry, not work against them. As you can see here on the right side, that's a picture from our New Food Conference. It happens every year here in Berlin, next time in October actually. And there we bring together big players from the food industry that work on solutions how to make the food system more sustainable and more plant-based. And also, we certify this V label in Germany that you for sure have seen before, because we think that plant-based options should not be only available, but they also have to be easy to find, right? And then another really exciting project we do in this area is our ProVet Incubator. So the ProVet Incubator is aimed at supporting startups that create plant-based and cultivated foods. There's a 12-week program where we support them with know-how. We also connect them to funding opportunities to make sure that we have really great options, plant-based or cultivated, on the market for everyone to enjoy. And very recently, actually, we also launched a spin-off program from this ProVet Incubator that aims at supporting social entrepreneurs and also non-profit organizations to work on their projects to work on the food system. So that's also a very recent development that just started last month, actually. And finally, another very important type of intervention that we do is the political level and doing advocacy on the political level. So in Germany, for example, one of the key areas we work on is lobbying against the tax discrimination. So as you might know, in Germany we have currently a situation where, for example, cow's milk has a tax rate of only 7% and plant milk has a tax rate of 19%. That doesn't make any sense and that should change immediately. And that is one of our signature campaigns this year on the political level in Germany. Now, on the international level, as one example, ProVet has the permanent observer status at the IPCC. And this gives us the possibility to actually participate in the World Climate Conferences and bring food system change onto the agenda. We've seen before that 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from animal agriculture. The food system has even 30%. So logically, the discussions surrounding the climate crisis should reflect these percentages. And here you can actually see a photo from the last, or the previous climate conference in Glasgow, our politics team being present there. And this year in Dubai, COP28, we are going to set up a pavilion again that will be focused on food system change to make sure the topic is on the agenda. So this was to give you kind of an overview of the different interventions we do. You can see we have a lot on our plate. We are a very passionate group of people. You can see in the front our founding team, Melanie Joy, Tobias Leonard, and Sebastian Joy. You might also recognize this guy over here. That's me. That photo was taken in the courtyard of our Berlin office. And well, by now we are more than 200 employees worldwide. We never get everyone to participate at one photo shooting. We are spread over 10 countries on 4 continents. And well, yeah, we're all united in this passion to really transform our food system to make it ready for the future. And given that you've seen all these different interventions that we can take, who of you would agree that this is actually a problem that's tractable, that can be solved? Right, so again, the majority. So now that we've established that, let's see what we can do or how you can help. And first of all, one thing you can do is donate to ProVet. As you've seen before, this whole area of work is underfunded at the moment. So any donation you can make is very valuable to make this work more, grow more. On the other hand, you can also consider working with us. We have open positions from internship to leadership positions. We have remote work. We have offices in a lot of different countries. And also there are possibilities to get involved on a voluntary basis. So consider doing that. Now, what's really exciting, I think, about this whole topic is that unlike a lot of other cause areas, there is more that we can do apart from giving our money or giving our time. Because we can also do something on an individual level. We can change our own diet. Now, if you have struggled with this in the past, and a lot of people have, consider participating at our Veggie Challenge, for example. Don't be too hard on yourself. If taking this whole step to going vegan is too far, just take one step at a time, because every step is really valuable. And then finally, spread the word about it. From my experience, a lot of people think about these type of interventions that I've discussed here to be directed at reducing animal suffering. And of course, they reduce animal suffering, but I hope you could see that they go far beyond that. By removing animals from our diets on an individual level or on a societal level, removing animals from our food system, we create a huge positive impact in a lot of different areas. So let's get the word out on this and let's take action. Thank you very much. Do we have some time for questions? Great.
Right. Does this mic work?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Then I will just go to the event. So I didn't tell anybody to write questions so far, but if you have some questions, you can go into the page of the event, and there is a live discussion button and a question tab, and in there you can write your question. There's quite a few already, but if you want, you can upvote questions that you like, and we will try to answer those first. All right, so first question, most upvoted, is how likely do you think it is that ProVet Mission, 50% by 2040, will be reached?
Oh, so that's a really interesting question. I get asked this quite a lot. and I have been told by my colleagues at ProVet that I am unusually optimistic about this. So personally, I am entirely convinced we're going to achieve this much earlier than 2040. The reason for that being we have already a lot of changes happening in society right now, especially in terms of alternatives to animal-based products being available. So at the current moment, we don't have cultivated food products available. But I think if this is going to change within the next 5 to 10 years, for a lot of people, there will be absolutely no reason anymore to consume animal products, because cultivated foods on any metric we look at are much better than the animal-based options. And on the other hand, if we normalize this topic of plant-based eating as well in the society, which is a large part of our work, and that's also a development that we've seen in society, all these barriers that we talked about before are going to disappear. So yeah, I'm extremely optimistic about this.
Nice. All right, then the next question is, what are the biggest skill gaps at ProVeg or in the cause area in general?
The biggest skill gaps. That's a question I have to think about. So I think that one area where we have still a lot of low-hanging fruits is the political level. Right? So if we look at the food industry, already a lot is happening. A lot of the big industry players are going into the plant-based market, going into the cultivated food market. But for example, at the last World Climate Conference, there was still a steak being served for catering. So on the political level, there's still a lot to do. And I think for us as an organization, I cannot speak for all organizations, of course, but for us as an organization, I think expertise in how to influence policies and policymakers would be highly valuable.
Okay, thank you. So the area might be underfunded, but is there any research or evaluation on how cost-effective funding is?
Right. So we have, of course, for example, Animal Charity Evaluators, which is a meta-organization that specifically tries to evaluate the cost-effectiveness of organizations in this area. At the same time, one issue with these type of meta-charities is, as we mentioned before, they're usually focused only on one area. So Animal Charity Evaluators, for example, they look at animal suffering, but they don't really look at all the other issues we talked about. So the effects on global health or on the climate crisis and so on. So I think this is actually a really big challenge at the moment in the EA movement to have really solid calculations or estimates what is most cost effective. And I think, for example, if you are considering to donate to organizations or to get active in organizations and don't really know which one is the most effective, the way I go about it is to see how are they structured, how are they set up, what kind of processes do they have in place. And I think at the current moment that's the best way to go about it.
All right. I really like your slides. Will you share them somewhere?
I think this talk is being recorded, so right. If you want to get the actual slides, you can write an email to me. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so what do you think about GFI? Any critics or praise? Criticism or praise?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of GFI actually. So we work together with GFI on different levels. They are similar in their goals to ProVeg. They have kind of a different focus. So they are focused entirely on the supply side of alternatives to animal products, specifically cultivated foods, while ProVeg is sort of broader in its scope. And in general, I think, however, that we should try to cooperate as much as possible with mission-aligned organizations, and GFI is definitely one of them.
All right. So there are a few questions in the chat instead of the questions. I will check if something has some thumbs up. No, I will stick to the questions for now. Mm-hmm. So I have the same kind of thinking that food system change is the most effective overall. Why do you think it's not common in EA? How would you change that?
Right, so I think one of the reasons why it's not so common in EA is precisely this situation we talked about earlier, that in EA we have this approach to look at cause areas separately. And food system change simply is not just in one cause area. It has huge impacts on a variety of cause areas. So it's kind of the way our framework is set up that makes it hard for food system change to get the attention that it requires. One thing we can do, I think, is give talks at EA conferences to raise awareness for this topic, which is what I'm doing right now, and really raise awareness in our community to not consider these type of organizations or interventions to be only about animals. Yeah.
Right, thank you. You seem very confident about achieving your goal of 50% by 2040. Do you have quantified results of ProVeg work supporting this claim?
Well, if we look at the global animal consumption, historically it has risen all the time, and it is currently rising. But that's only historical data, and historical data does not include, for example, all the possibilities that come about with cultivated foods, because it simply doesn't exist yet. So it's really hard to get solid data on this. The best thing we can do is educated guesses and trying to be as precise and effective in making these predictions how cultivated foods, for example, are going to affect our food system. But definitely, I think especially cultivated foods will be the major impact on the way the world is going to eat. And that's just something historical data is impossible to show.
Yeah, okay. Is the plant-based diet change you're optimistic about just Western Europe or also meat-eating other parts of the world?
Well, can you repeat the question?
Is the plant-based diet change you're optimistic about just for Western Europe or also affecting, you think would also be applicable to other parts of the world that are now rising, for example?
Right, so first of all, the way we eat in the Western world directly affects people in other places of the world. As we saw before, the food system based on animal products wastes a lot of resources. We have feed for animals being grown all over the world to feed animals that are on factory farms in the Western world. So this is a direct impact. If we're talking about convincing, for example, people outside of the Western world to change their diet, that's a bit of a tough topic, of course, right? Looking historically. I think the best we can do is we have to understand that in the Western world we are in a certain privileged situation. A lot of us can actually choose what we eat. Not everyone can do that. And I think we shouldn't go to places where people struggle with having adequate access to food and tell them what to eat. We should be aware of the privileged position we are in and do our best to reduce the negative impact we have with our food choices on the world. Looking at the long term, I think considering the wasteful practices in the animal agriculture, I think it is highly likely that we'll be able at some point in the future to make a plant-based food system or a food system including cultivated foods available to the whole world. But we got to take one step at a time, just like when we change our personal diets.
That's very true. Would you say the best way to address this problem is to work within EA, for example, climate change community, global health, or what community do you think would be more susceptible to operate a food system change?
That's a good question. So I think in terms of health, I think we're a bit outside of the scope of EA in some ways, because from an EA perspective, for example, pandemics that I mentioned earlier matter more in terms of engineered pandemics than natural pandemics. Because even though Corona affected our lives quite a lot and killed a lot of people, it was not an existential risk, right? On the other hand, I think climate change can be a very important area to advocate for within the EA community, because that poses an existential risk, not only through the direct impacts because of runaway climate change, for example, but also because of the food scarcity it can lead to, and then military conflicts over scarce resources. So that is a real possibility for future conflicts in our world. And on the other hand, what I mentioned before, this idea of moral circle expansion, I think is also something very important to be discussing within the EA community, especially considering that we have such a strong focus on long-termism at the moment and on AI safety. I think that this idea of, or this strategy to expand our moral circles can be an extremely potent way to improve the far future.
So there is a question about areas where, I have to find it again. So if there are some areas in the world where it's not possible to, for example, grow food for humans, many areas of land are not very fertile, and they can provide food for animals, for example, grass, Arctic areas, near desert, but not for humans. How can people in those areas live without animal agriculture?
Right, so at this current point in time, I would urge everyone not to focus on these fringe areas in the world where it is impossible to grow plant-based foods. If we manage to affect the large majority of the food system that exists right now, if we can produce our food much more effectively, we will also reduce the required land mass in order to produce food globally. And if we are more effective in using the limited resources, we can also make food available to more people. So maybe in those places in the long-term future, we cannot grow plant-based food, but we can provide plant-based food from other places in the world.
Right. What would you recommend to a person who really wants to continue drinking meat or eating cheese or eggs? Should they spend more money on organic products or donate the difference to ProVeg?
Well, so that's a good question. So I think organic farming is an entirely different topic, I would say. So of course, organic farming can be more sustainable, but it is not necessarily so. So sometimes organic farming uses up more resources, especially when we talk about animal agriculture, because as the food producers often advertise, the animals have a better life, a longer life, which means we also put in more resources. So I think organic farming is a good thing in the long term, but it's not the area of the big impact. I would recommend that you try to do your best in changing your diet step by step towards a plant-based diet. Don't be too hard on yourself. As I said before, every step is valuable. And then donating, as we've discussed before, can make a huge impact, especially at the current moment. This whole movement or this cause area is very much underfunded, and donations can go a really long way. So if you can do that, I want to encourage you to do that.
Right. Well, this is a bit of a spicy question. I don't think I've seen ProVeg charity, animal charity evaluators. Why is that? So,
yeah, that's a spicy question, as you say. So animal charity evaluators, they evaluated ProVeg actually several times in the past, and we were granted a standout charity award last time in 2018. Now, animal charity evaluators changed their process of evaluating quite a lot in the recent years, and we did actually apply to be evaluated again, but at the current moment, they do not have the capacity to actually evaluate all the organizations that want to be evaluated. So at the present moment, hopefully we can be evaluated again next year. But on the other hand, I think something that's also very important to mention here is, again, that animal charity evaluators only look at animal suffering. So an organization like ProVeg that has a much broader spectrum doesn't really entirely fit into this metrics that is used by animal charity evaluators. And hopefully in the future, we can also create new meta-organization or charity evaluators that take account of these intercausal impacts that we've discussed today.
All right. What do you think about insect welfare?
That's also a good topic. So insect welfare is at the present moment hard to really evaluate because there are a lot of different studies suggesting to what degree insects have a conscious experience or not. But the general consensus seems to be that they do have some degree of consciousness and that therefore should be taken into consideration. Now, at the present moment, most farmed insects are farmed in order to be fed to animals that are farmed. So by focusing on the topic that we focus on, by changing the food system, getting rid of animal agriculture, we also impact insect suffering.
All right. So when do you think that cultivated meat will become more cheap to mass produce?
More cheap than the animal-based products?
I guess so.
I guess, yeah. Well, that's a really good question. There have been a lot of different estimations, kind of similar to when is going to be the point of a super intelligent AGI. You have a lot of different opinions and voices on this. My best educated guess would be that it happens within the next 10 years. But it depends on some very important open questions. So what, for example, organizations like ProVet or GFI work on is influencing policymakers to direct more funding into this research. So currently, it's only profit organizations that do this research, but considering all the potential impacts it can have, positive impacts on our food system as a society, there is a good case to be made for governments to contribute to the funding. And that's what we're working on. And this will drastically change these kind of estimations when cultivated food will be available to everyone.
Right. So there are quite a lot of questions. I don't know.
By the way, we also have office hours. So If we can't get through all the questions right now, yes. At 2 o'clock, maybe you know the room?
Yes, it's a Newton. It's the room on the next floor, right next to the, what is it called? Edison? No, not Edison. Yeah, Edison, actually. So next floor, all the way to the end, is the office hours room. But yeah, we have maybe 2 more minutes, so if you want, we can
Let's go ahead.
Try some more questions.
Spicy questions, please.
Only those.
Only spicy, yeah.
Oh, wow. How effective do you think is the grassroots animal liberation movement and actions such as protests or blockades?
Interesting question to be asking me. Well, it's really hard sometimes to evaluate these kind of interventions. What I do believe is that there is this concept of the Overton window, right? So that you have kind of interventions that are perceived as being very extreme that make less extreme interventions seem more normal. So to some degree, we could say that organizations like ProVet, who are very cooperative with policymakers, for example, or the food industry, benefit from these kind of interventions. On the other hand, of course, it can also detract people from taking veganism, for example, seriously because they think, oh, these people are really weird, I don't want to have anything to do with them. Yeah, that's really a spicy topic and hard to evaluate. But more generally, I think it's also important that we pursue a lot of different strategies. Yeah, with different organizations, different approaches, reach different people and different institutions. So in general, I think having a variety of approaches is a good thing.
Right. I think that's all we have time for right now. So there is office hours, as I mentioned, in Newton at 2. So if you have more questions or want to talk to Chris, you can do that then. And for now, thank you, everybody. And yeah, enjoy your lunch.
Thanks very much.